We've obviously got the A90, which is probably the main arterial route through the area, which gives us probably the worst impact type of road traffic collisions, whereas the ones that we find in the sort of rural towns and that are probably less impactful. However, on the rural roads between towns, we can sometimes get quite severe impact ones there. But what I would say is there's no real trends of note across the Angus area, and it varies from quarter to quarter. Would that answer your question?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Duff, page 28.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yes, it was really just a sort of general question about the new fire detection rules. I know I've been approached by a number of sort of fairly elderly, vulnerable individuals who are concerned about that, and I just wonder if the representatives from fire service maybe want to give us some guidance there and what they can do to help and so on. And I think also the other one I think that perhaps people are not aware of is the insurance implications if you don't comply with what it will be the law from February.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Yes, it's a concern that we're also picking up in the community. We have a number of stations. We provide information from the station. We've put up directing people towards the Scottish Government FAQs and guidance online. It isn't a fire service piece of legislation. It in fact sits with housing. So for us to be very definitive on it, we are referring people to the housing legislation as the rules are significantly different from anything that would come under the Fire Scotland Act. In terms of supporting those in the community, our home fire safety visit programme will continue to adapt. We have been given significant funding by the Scottish Government to move towards the new detection system, and we fit those in owner-occupied premises where we identify the occupier as high risk. We use a scoring matrix through our home fire safety visit to identify those that fall into that category, and certainly those that are residents that have a landlord or social landlord. There is a separate obligation on those landlords to fit the detection, so hopefully that will capture a large number of people. But we will continue to support owner-occupied. We'll continue to support with information and guiding towards the correct information on the Scottish Government website. And even for those that don't fall into that owner-occupied high-risk category, if we carry out a visit, we still have the single point detection that we have used up to this stage. We can still fit that to ensure that people have got some protection in the event of a fire in their premises. So we've got a number of actions ongoing. We also have significant funding that we had allocated previously to our ongoing home fire safety visit, and again we'll merge that in. So it is a case of we're doing everything we can. We're trying to identify those people in the community that really need assistance, and we've been provided with the training, the equipment and funding to carry on with that support. So hopefully that gives you some comfort, and we'll continue to work with those in the community.
Yeah, thanks for that response. That's reassuring to know. Thank you.
Councillor Devine, you were on page 28 as well.
Yes, and it's on the same topic actually, because this morning I got information to say that Caledonian Housing Care and Repair have also been given money by the Scottish Government to carry out this. At the moment, if you go onto their website, there's absolutely nothing to tell you that, but maybe you would be happy to point people in their direction for that, or indeed to speak to them, because I don't understand why it's not on their website, because a lot of people who are vulnerable will be using them both in Perth and Kinross and in Angus. So it would be useful if you could perhaps help with that one.
Thank you very much. And I wasn't aware of that. I think as another partner in the whole rollout of this, I think it's well worthwhile trying to link up to make sure that people are referring across each other so that people can access the right help from the right body as easily as possible. So I'll certainly take that one away. I'll follow up and just see if that's hot off the press today, then perhaps there were a little bit of lag in getting that information out to people. But if the fire service can help with that, then we will certainly endeavour to do so through our information pages as well.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
If I could just come in the back of that, Stephen, is there any advice to owner-occupier local companies who are prepared to install this? I've seen in the sort of weekend press lots of companies in the Glasgow area advertising it, but I haven't seen anything from local companies. Do you have any lists of local companies who would be prepared to tender for this work?
Unfortunately, it's probably out with our remit in terms of being a public body, and we would fall foul of that competition and the free market. The trade bodies that govern electricians, I think, is probably the place to go with that. I think companies are now gearing up, but I would always recommend your local electrician that you've used before. I think they're now getting trained, getting an understanding of what's required, and I think we will see some more local aspect to that, but it's certainly not something that the fire service could do considering our position within the community.
But it's something that your local electrician should be able to deal with.
If they're a registered electrician, then I fully expect that they will be well aware of this and be preparing, if not already started, fitting these. Right,
I just want to switch now to Mark Armstrong. I noted the comments that Stephen made about this being a housing matter. Could you make sure that we pick this up by council and as a housing team?
Yes,
so
certainly.
That our housing team can give advice?
Yes, certainly, convener. And I know that they're already working on this with Scottish Fire and Rescue, certainly in terms of our properties and those that they work with registered social landlords on, but we'll put that in the note and progress that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be something that if it was on our website, that people could access and get advice as to, as Stephen has just said, approach your local electrician or whatever. And I don't know whether it would be competent for us to give a list of electricians that we deal with.
We could direct them to our trusted traders scheme.
That's it. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Duff, you want to come back in?
Convener, I was just going to make the point about the trusted trader stream as well, so that's been covered. Thank you.
Councillor Braze, is that a legacy hand? Right. Councillor Devine, page 32.
Yeah, it isn't a question, convener. It's just to say I'm so pleased to see that getting involved with the White Ribbon campaign. And as a Forfar councillor, I'm extremely pleased to see that Strathmore Rugby Club or Rugby Trust has also got involved with this. So the more people, the more men particularly who get involved with it, the better. So I congratulate you on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Bell, general comment?
It was a question, but yeah, I'd like to pick up on what Lynn said there around the valuing the community engagement that the fire service does, and particular the challenge poverty work and the White Ribbon engagement. I really appreciate that. My question actually relates to your workforce and how well and resilient it's feeling. I'm always concerned about our frontline workers, and I think we picked up in a recent scrutiny audit around the police sickness absence has gone up, partly due to COVID, partly due to sort of violent attacks and what have you. And I just wanted to ask Stephen and Scott if they could give us a wee check-in on how well your staff are, because that is a concern. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bell. Yes, it's something that does exercise our minds. As a national organisation, we spend a lot of time trying to develop a resilient culture. There's a lot of work going into our mental health strategy, and that starts to pay dividend. I think our staff are a pretty resilient bunch. They work well in a team, and the way we operate in that team environment does lend itself to sort of a strong, resilient workforce. COVID certainly is still continuing to have an impact, and even around the extra level of measures that we require to make sure that it doesn't spread through our stations. So we are particularly cautious around isolations and making sure that people take time off whenever they're symptomatic or have a positive LFD test. So that impact on the the attendance rate, we deal with that, and we are fortunate, I suppose, in being part of that bigger service. We've got an increased level of resilience, both in the officer cadre and with support from neighbouring local areas. So overall, yes, we've come through this in a fairly resilient manner. We're very aware that it's been challenging for people. I think constantly being on Teams, not having face-to-face, there's a lot to be said for being able to sit and just chat to someone. As a management team, we're really putting a lot of effort into making sure we're getting to all the retained stations. We just get to hear what's going on. We appreciate that people have been working in bubbles and they're isolated, and challenges at work and at home are very different now. So as a full package, we're really putting a lot of effort into it, and thank you very much for your words there, and we'll continue to hopefully provide the best service that we can for the community of Angus.
Yeah, thank you. Well, can I just ask yourself, Stephen, and Scott to just wait till the police are done, and just in case there's anything that comes up there that you would want to comment on. Okay, let's move on to item 5. Chief Superintendent Davidson and Chief Inspector Blacklaw.
Thank you, convener, and good afternoon. Really good to be here again today and to see everybody, and I trust that everybody's okay after the past weekend of extreme weather, which has undoubtedly affected all of us. As you've mentioned, I'm joined today by Chief Inspector Leanne Blacklaw, who is the local area commander for Angus, and between us we'll hopefully be able to answer any questions that members have. In terms of the policing report today, I trust that members have had the opportunity to read the report and therefore would not intend to go over the full submission. The report provides performance update and associated contextual information, as it always does, against the local policing plan for Angus. However, it also shows linkages of our local objectives into the national policing objectives, and as well as supporting the Angus Community Plan. This report covers the period of Q2, 1st of July to the 30th of September. However, focuses on year-to-date data from the 1st of April to the 30th of September and comparative against the same period from the year before. And as per the last quarter, I would again advise members that this period has comparison against a period in the previous year that had increased pandemic restrictions in place, and that does make direct comparisons year on year quite challenging. We continue to see the significant easing of restrictions and absolutely more aligned to pre-pandemic policing demands. We continue to see that further increased road traffic use, further increased social interaction, and now pretty much a fully opened licensed trade. And the combination of all of that is that leads to increases in associated offences. I say that at the same time as whilst we can't be complacent over COVID and just the most recent variant strain that's coming out means that the impact on our communities and certainly on blue light services and many other services are going to be felt for quite some time into the future. After speaking at our last session, we were just ahead of what was to be the Conference of the Parties 26, COP26. And I think it's appropriate in my opening to thank members for their support ahead of that nationally significant event. It's a reasonable assessment to say that the policing operation was a success, which followed significant planning in what was one of the most complex policing operations ever for Scotland. Our officers from Angus and the wider Tayside area did us proud. Whether that be representing their specialisms at the event itself or in providing the essential ongoing and high quality daily services that they provide to our local communities in Angus. And I'm really proud of their efforts in that regard, and thank members again for their support during that period. Clearly, beyond COP26, we now look forward to the associated policing requirements, multi-agency requirements for the festive season, and our festive plans are well developed and in place, and then into a fresh new year. I don't propose to say much more in terms of opening. I'd be keen just to get into questions and clearly discussion points with members. There's a fair bit of detail and content in the report, as there always is, and I trust that it is of benefit and use to members. And therefore, I would just thank you all again and open up for questions to be answered between Leanne and I.
Okay, bids for questions? I don't believe it. No question. Councillor Devine.
Page 40 and 57, please.
Anyone else? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, I did get my hand up and it came off of its own volition. Pages 39, 50 and 61, please, Chair.
39, 50 and 61.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? No. Right, let's start off with 39.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your report. Obviously, really concerned to see those stats go up in terms of
exiting.
rising crime levels and the dip in detection. But I wanted to pick up on a road safety issue that's been raised with me this week around cyclists without lights. You know, and I think it comes back every year, you know, with winter, but it was particularly in relation to paper deliveries and, you know, the young riders not having lights on, which is clearly an issue for both their employer and their parents, I would have thought. But is that something that you are aware of across the whole of the patch? I think it might be worth a wee campaign, a road safety campaign, because, you know, there's lots of us out and about on the roads quite early on, and people are just so easy to miss, and likewise in the evening as well. And I have to say, it's not just children and young people, and there's a lot of adults out there without adequate lighting on the roads as well, on their bicycles. Thanks.
Before you answer that one, could I just ask you to also address the question of or light-coloured clothing, because that can be very helpful as well in identifying cyclists. If your lights from your car flashes across a reflective jacket, you actually know there's somebody there, whereas if they've got something very dark and black on, you see them.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Convener. I suppose, firstly, I'll talk about just the figures we've got in relation to the roads there. Clearly, the road deaths is static in terms of the same period from last year. The serious injuries, though, it does see an increase, and that's 17% higher than the comparable period last year. However, the comparable period last year certainly had less traffic on the road, so that will account for some of the reason for that increase. Thankfully, in terms of wider, you know, less serious injuries, we've actually seen a 38% reduction compared to the same period last year. So overall, that makes for a reduction in the totality in terms of incidents on the road. In terms of incidents involving pedal cycles, as you described, the main aspects involved in those incidents that I'm describing there are primarily relate to vehicles, and actually the volume that we see that relate to pedal cycles is thankfully quite low, which is helpful. And I suppose, though, that doesn't take away the dangers that are clearly present. Members will be aware of Operation Close Pass that we've clearly had, and do continue to deploy where it's appropriate to do so, and where we've got figures and data that suggest that there's a requirement for that. We continue to engage and link in with schools routinely in terms of the programmes that are delivered primarily through the schools around about cycle safety, and you know, local policing help to inform those programmes, and a part of that is clearly around about lighting and appropriate clothing. And the national campaigns that come out and always do around about the sort of the darker nights coming in always have a feature relative to cycling and use of the roads in the wintertime, where clearly visibility is much reduced, and we play our part in clearly sharing that through the usual media and local media channels, which would clearly highlight those points. I don't know if that just helps answer on both parts, just in terms of a bit of assurance around about those figures relative to cyclists, and that we do, in a preventative sense, clearly look to raise awareness in each year that goes by as we hit the darker nights.
Okay. Right, let's move on now. Councillor Devine, page 40.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on that point, particularly because last year or the year before, I think it might have been, Forfar Community Council actually gave all the paper boys and girls lights and reflective kind of things across them, so I don't know whether they wear them or not, that's the thing, but at least they took action on that one. So, but I do think it's important, because it's just so scary when you just nearly miss a cyclist because of the dark clothing and no lights. My query on page 40, it's good to see that the Mentors in Violence programme is getting underway again. I see that Arbroath Academy is now being the latest school to be involved. How many schools does that make now? I know that Forfar Academy started it off, so it would be good to know that. And also the Partnerships and Preventions Department, I was wondering how you feel that's working now in terms of antisocial behaviour.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll come to Leanne in a second, I suppose, to see if she's got the answer for how many schools, because I don't have that specifically. What I can say around about the Mentors in Violence programme is that I certainly see it as a really key deliverable for us, and I absolutely support it as Divisional Commander, not just in Angus but across the wider piece. It's proven to have benefits across the whole country, and I absolutely endorse its use in Tayside. So maybe for that question first, I'll just come to Leanne if she does have that information about how many schools across Angus.
Sorry, I don't have that. I'll get it for you and update you. I'll find out how many we're now at.
Okay, thanks, Leanne. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. And we'll, as I say, as Leanne says, we'll get that to you. In terms of the partnerships and prevention approach, I think the reality is that prevention is and should be a key priority and focus for policing and in the multi-agency space, and we therefore put a lot of effort into that area, because that then clearly reduces downstream demand and clearly downstream issues and concerns for communities. So we have a portfolio within Tayside Division of partnerships, prevention, community wellbeing, and that's led by a Superintendent Nikki Russell. Nikki has a team of staff that work in that partnerships prevention intervention setting, and they are split and active across each of the 3 Tayside local authority policing areas. They also have a connection into our national partnerships prevention and community wellbeing department, who, between the connection both nationally and to locally, have a lot of tools, information, equipment, activities that can be deployed on a local basis, and we also run through that as sort of an annual campaigns calendar, which, as you would imagine, ties in at different points of the year when, for example, we're coming into the festive period just now, so there's a focus on festive prevention activities, and equally when we then come into the height of summer, it's around about maybe water-based activities and other things in that sort of sense. So unless there was a specific question around about Angus, I would just endorse that I'm certainly satisfied with the structures that I've got. I know that, well, I'll maybe come to Leanne in a second, that she gets the service for Angus that we would expect and support that really is needed. Leanne, I don't know if there's anything you wish to add for that local context.
No, absolutely, Councillor. Yeah, with the sort of move towards the more localised element of it is extremely beneficial. We'll have a member of that department at our morning meetings every day, and the antisocial behaviour, of course, isn't only their remit; it's all of our remits. So that there's really good links with our community officers, our response officers, and it features all through everything we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Right then, Councillor Bell, page 50.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was really concerned about the cyber fraud statistics and the rise there, and these criminals are getting more and more devious every month. And a couple of questions actually. Are there any current trendy scams that people out there should know about? I mean, the HMRC and Amazon Prime ones are probably still rife, and also of the 135 people who've been a victim of cyber fraud, you know, I know like £40 scam could affect someone more than, you know, £1,000 scam somewhere else. It's all absolutely relative. But I just wondered if you had a total figure for the amount of money in Angus that has been scammed from our citizens to give us a hint of the scale of the issue. Because I just think it's just going to get worse, particularly as we're more dedicated to online life, really. That I thought that might help people realise the scale of it. Thank you.
No, thanks, Councillor, and a really good question. I suppose I'll give a bit of context in relation to fraud, and then I can hand over to Leanne for that local context that's there. But certainly, in terms of fraud, we've continued to see an increase throughout the whole of the pandemic, and I think coming out of the pandemic, that seems to have stayed the course, where I guess criminals being opportunistic with the way the lockdown occurred looked for additional means to try and carry out activities, and that's certainly seen that exploitation and big rise in the figures. It is helpful to have some context around about what those figures are made up of. So that 135 generally fall into 5 different brackets of fraud. And those relate to, around about a fifth of them relate to the offering of goods for sale. So that's the obtaining of money by bank's transfer or other sort of money transfer and then failing to send those goods. So it's essentially putting something up for sale fraudulently and not carrying through with that thing. And another sort of fifth of fraudulent activity is the fraudulent use of a bank card, accessing someone's sort of online banking to purchase goods, and the majority of those can be via contactless payments, can be on the online banking space through obtaining true passwords. We then get into 3 other brackets that make up the category of fraud, and they come from telephone, so persons purporting to be from a person's bank or other sort of government agency such as HMRC, and the victim thereafter being persuaded to sort of transfer money to a safe account, and often that's levied with sort of intimidation type tactics that you'll gain a fine if you don't pass up money, and we then have additional categories of a bogus work person type offences. So that falls under fraud as well, offering substandard goods and essentially making off either with incomplete jobs or otherwise. And an additional category falls into the failing to pay for services. So that fraud can often take place in the hospitality sector or when using taxis. So the 135 is made up of quite an array of different types of activity and techniques. And because of that, in a preventative sense, we clearly have to consider prevention in a number of different ways. So we've got a divisional fraud action group, and that has established an existing banking protocols which are designed to protect the elderly and the vulnerable from withdrawing high sums of money. And clearly we use that partnership working in that space to try and provide some protection. We've been really proactive in the space of frauds. You know, people are much less dealing with physical money and much more with online payments. So the advice through community groups, the advice through you know, media pages and elsewhere to really drill home the different types of scams that go on and try and increase that awareness so that people can protect themselves. And now that goes down to password protection. It goes down to you know, posing more questions on a phone call coming through, seeking identification and verification in terms of any person that is making contact where there's monetary aspects involved. Clearly, it's concerning because inevitably it's vulnerable groups that are targeted, and that Divisional Fraud Action Group absolutely focuses into those most vulnerable groups, and that's where a priority has to be for us. In terms of the other part of your question, which was around the extent of money that we think may have come from that, I'm not sure that we would be able to tangibly give a number on that at this point. We could certainly go away and have a look to see what we could maybe get out of it, and some of that becomes because there's attempted frauds in there where a bank has maybe intervened and cancelled a payment at different points, and it becomes complex from point of police reporting to actual loss. There's variances that take place. I'll maybe just pass on to Leanne. She may have a bit more context in terms of extent of you know, volumes of money, but and otherwise any more local context just on the back of what I've said there.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Super. Yeah, as you've said, I suppose I don't have the exact figure to hand, and that's for all the reasons that you've said, the complexities about sometimes the banks stop it or the money's reimbursed or it doesn't follow right through to fruition. However, I would also, as you've said, Councillor, one amount of money to some person is a lot more significant than it may be to others. So that there is that, and there's also the psychological impact of the crimes that we're talking about here. People feel embarrassed, and that is just as significant, if not more, sometimes than the financial loss. There has been recently in the current quarter that we're in just now, so not Q2, but we have had a really high value fraud with an elderly lady, which was in the media, and we will continue to use, if there are significant events like that, for raising awareness, so that we've got the impact of that, and that's what we'll look to do going forward. But we are very much focusing on prevention, on sharing this awareness, and as you've said, it's such a quickly changing area that we need to keep on top of that and make sure that our messaging is current, because they are becoming more creative in the ways that these people are scamming people out of money.
Okay. Right, let's move on. Councillor Devine, page 57.
Draw that one, convener.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you. In that case, Councillor Bell, page 61.
Okay, thank you again, convener. Yeah, obviously we're in 16 days of action against violence against women, and it was really good to see officers in the Angus Leadership Summit yesterday around that, and really startling statistics around one incident of violence against women is reported every 9 minutes in Scotland, and violence against women is still the greatest single demand on the time of Police Scotland officers, and these figures are an absolute disgrace. It's a shocking societal reflection, and it just appalls me every day. My question is, I know a lot of what you're doing in the force to engage with partnership and how we're deepening partnership across the piece to tackle this. And I just wondered what you were doing internally, particularly with the White Ribbon campaign, what sort of action plan that looks like within the force to embed that kind of culture within your officers. And thank you for all that you're doing in the partnership. It's amazing. Thanks.
No, thanks, Councillor, and thanks for that thanks as well. Certainly, you're absolutely right in terms of the domestic abuse position. We unfortunately find ourselves across Tayside when we look at things in terms of rate per 10,000 population, that we certainly remain above the national average for reports that come into us of a domestic nature for Tayside, and that is something that not just in policing but clearly across the public protection arena is a key focus for us. I currently sit as the chair of the Chief Officers Group for Public Protection for Angus, working with the full range of partners and the Adult Protection, Child Protection Committee, all the different committees that make that up, where domestic abuse features across each and every one of them. Because of that, we clearly have an array of activity, both in a policing context and in a partnership context, and that with perpetrators is looking at perpetrators and seeking to be proactive. We would look at notifications where appropriate to try and help and advise. We clearly are working with third sector groups and support groups to help victims and those that we perceive that may become victims, to increase confidence levels for reporting as well. And clearly, in terms of any offences that are reported to us, then we absolutely pursue those with vigour and look to all available evidence that we can obtain to ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice. What needs to go alongside that? So whilst they are that preventative approach and that detection approach with a sound investigative footprint over the top of it, it's cultural change that we're clearly needing to target, and it's cultural change through as much awareness raising, support of the likes of White Ribbon, the 16 days that you've spoke about there, and really trying to, through every interaction we have, ensure that violence against women will not be tolerated and should not be tolerated. And it goes beyond more than just violence, coercive control, and other behaviours that fall into the domestic setting. An absolute concern for me, and a one that we are absolutely focused on. In terms of the local context, I know Leanne has a clear focus around about domestics as well, and gets support from our public protection unit that services the whole of Tayside. But Leanne, I don't know if there's any additional input you'd want to give just in terms of that local context.
I think in relation to the White Ribbon campaign, Councillor, we have obviously our Angus 16 days of action. We have officers attending and will be representing at those throughout, and that's from Angus officers as well as from DI Paul Both's team, who you met the other day from the domestic abuse team. We also have a number of officers who will be taking part in any media, etc. in relation to that. So working with the leads on the White Ribbon campaign here, and just becoming as involved as we can, and we'll obviously be encouraging our officers to also wear white ribbons.
Thank you. And could I just finally say, I love the Police Scotland Don't Be That Guy campaign. I think that's a really powerful tool, and if people haven't seen it, I would urge them to go and look it up. Thank you.
Okay, is that everything on police? In that case, we can excuse the police officers and the fire officers and let them get back to what they'd rather be doing. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks.
Thank
Right,
you.
can we move on to item 6, the annual accounts? I take it this is Mr. Lorimer.
Thank you, Convener. It is enough, and good afternoon to the committee. This is a significant report in the committee's calendar. It considers it's really the culmination of all the accounting and auditing process for financial year 2021. So the report provides the audited accounts along with the external auditor's report to members. And as the committee will be aware from past years, the ask is to authorise the accounts for signature. Now that's the accounts for the council, for the Angus Council Charitable Trust, and for the Strang Mortification Charity. It's been another very challenging year, I think I would say, in terms of preparing and auditing the accounts, but you'll see from the key messages at the start of Audit Scotland's report There's a lot to be pleased with. That includes an expected unqualified opinion on the 3 sets of accounts. There's comment about the council's budget process and our savings process being working well, and also some positive comments around our governance arrangements, which have been in place during 2021, which, as the committee knows, have been a bit different because of the different ways of working that the pandemic has caused. There are a couple of areas where we need to improve, and that includes areas like our performance reporting, and there are also a few actions in the auditor's report which we're on the case on, and we've set timescales and responses to those. I probably didn't want to say much more than that by way of introduction, convener. I was going to pass on to Carol Grant, who's the audit director from Audit Scotland, to talk to her report effectively. It might be useful if we hear from Carol, and then if there are questions on either the covering officer report or the accounts, we can maybe come back to those once the committee's heard from Carol, if that suits. Thanks.
Before we do that, Mr. Lorimer, can I just formally ask the committee to agree that we note the contents of item 4 and 5, which I did not do. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'll keep you right, Karen. Okay, right, let's go back to you, Mr. Lorimer, and I think you're just about to pass over to Carol Grant.
Yes, yes, convener, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, convener. So yeah, it's great to be here today and talking through the conclusion of the audit process for 2021. Our audit work on the annual accounts is now substantially complete, and just for the committee, I can confirm that the outstanding matter that's within the covering letter has now been resolved. So there are no outstanding matters that I'm drawing to your attention today. As Ian has said, we anticipate being able to issue unqualified audit opinions for the council, the Angus Council Charitable Trust, and the Robert and William Strang mortification. I'll just draw you to your attention that there is an emphasis of matter paragraph for valuation uncertainty in relation to the council, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I go into the annual audit report. I'll just conclude on the covering letter at the moment. So we present for your consideration our annual audit report. I will talk through Exhibit 2. Exhibit 2 within the report is matters that the auditing standards require me to draw to your attention as part of the audit process. It also contains conclusions from the public sector wider scope audit model. And
Carol, can I just interrupt you for a moment?
Of course.
If you're referring to appendices or reports, can you actually give us the page number to assist members in finding them?
No problem at all. I am on page 81 of the combined papers at the moment.
Thank you.
And just on paragraph 4, just to note that the report, the annual audit report, will be issued in final form after the accounts have been certified, as is the normal process. At paragraph 6, I just note there's one unadjusted error that I'm drawing to your attention. It is a balancing figure within the cash flow statement. Management have decided not to adjust this item, and it is significantly below materiality and actually only just above our clearly trivial threshold. At paragraph 7, we note that this is the opportunity for the Scrutiny and Audit Committee to make the audit team aware of anything they want to draw to our attention. So in particular, I'm seeking confirmation from those charged with governance of any known instances of actual, suspected or alleged fraud, any subsequent events that have occurred since the date of the financial statements, or any material non-compliance with laws and regulations that they think should be brought to my attention. I will pause there slightly. I'm not expecting anything, but if anyone would like to raise a hand to draw something to my attention, then I will be happy to hear from them. Okay, that's great. So I will move on. So finally, just in paragraph 9, I just refer to Appendix D, which is the draft letter of representation, which I will be asking Ian to sign and send over alongside the signed accounts as part of the audit process. I shall now skip forward to the annual audit report, which starts on page 97 of the papers. The key messages start on page 99. I actually won't cover them at the moment because I end up picking them up as I move my way through the report. So the first thing I just want to say in paragraph 1 was just to confirm that this report concludes and contains all of our findings that have arisen from our audit of Angus Council and its group. The scope was defined in the annual audit plan, which has previously been presented to the Scrutiny and Audit Committee in April. And the key thing within the introduction that I would like to draw your attention to is at paragraph 12 on page 101. And that is just to confirm that we as the audit team have not undertaken any non-audit related services, and therefore the audit fee that was presented in the plan remains unchanged. And also to confirm that we comply with the Financial Reporting Council's ethical standards, and I'm not aware of any relationships within the audit team that could compromise our objectivity and independence. So now into the first main section of the report, and on page 103, our audit opinions, as I've mentioned, are unmodified. At paragraph 15, I just note the emphasis of matter paragraph, which refers to the impact of COVID-19 on the valuation of property. That is something that was also in place last year within the independent auditor's report. They are added to draw attention to matters where there could be an impact on the understanding of the accounts, and the valuation uncertainty in the valuer's report stems from guidance which relates to the impact of COVID-19. It is worth saying that note 4 in the annual accounts highlights this uncertainty, and just to avoid any doubt, the audit opinion is not modified in the respect of this matter. The COVID-19 pandemic impacted on the audit process, and the annual accounts were signed off later than planned. At this point, I would like to thank the committee and apologise for having to cancel the previous meeting where we should have been considering this, and just to note that I do appreciate the flexible approach which have been taken to support the audit process. At paragraph 16 on page 104, I note the good support we have received from finance staff throughout the audit. We do flag the completeness and accuracy of accounting records and the extent of information and explanations that were required for the audit and the impact the COVID-19 pandemic had on the audit process. We also point to the support and information for staff costs and the remuneration report, which I'll come to in Exhibit 2. As already mentioned, again, the audit opinions for the Section 106 charities are unmodified. We received at page 105, apologies, we did receive a statutory objection to the annual accounts as part of the process of the local authority accounts regulations. We undertook work in relation to 3 specific areas, but overall our audit work confirmed that no adjustments were required to the unaudited annual accounts as a result of the points that were raised. I would just like to move on now to Exhibit 2, which is on page 107. As I've already mentioned, the first point we note is the material valuation uncertainty. We note that the audit opinion is not modified, but that we do believe that it is something that we have to draw to the attention of anyone using or looking at the annual accounts. The second point is in relation to asset revaluations. The finance team actually notified us of this error as part of the audit process. So it is an adjustment to from the unaudited accounts, but it was something that was picked up by the finance team. And it was basically that the initial revaluation figures didn't include in-year capital spend as part of an adjustment to the figures. The net gain on revaluation was calculated at 7.9 million, but this is then reduced to 3.9 million in the audited accounts. These have been processed, and we have included a recommendation in relation to the asset accounting, just to ensure that this is something that is captured and corrected earlier in the process moving forwards. The third point is just in relation to the COVID-19 agency grant disclosures. Obviously this year the process of giving the COVID-19 grants has been significant for the council, and there was, to be honest, quite late guidance in terms of some of the aspects of what would be principal for the council and where they were acting as agents for the Scottish Government. So we required some additional narrative disclosure in relation to those agency arrangements to be included in the narrative to the accounts, just to ensure that it was clear for the readers of the accounts the arrangements that were in place. And I can confirm that those expanded disclosures have now been made. The fourth point relates to the housing revenue account appropriation of general fund assets. And really the technicalities involved in that. It's quite an unusual transaction, and there was a requirement for an impairment to take place. I can confirm that this has all now been processed, and the correct accounting treatment has been processed within the annual accounts that you're approving today. The fifth point was just in relation to the assets under construction that had been capitalised. Our audit testing identified one asset that was incorrectly capitalised as an addition, and it was actually still under construction. Again, that has been adjusted within the audited accounts. At point 6, we note an overpayment to a senior councillor, and it was due to a change in role. Again, we can confirm that the disclosures within the remuneration report have been corrected, and that there was an overpayment of over £3,000, and arrangements are now in place to ensure that that overpayment is reclaimed. As I mentioned earlier, point 7 is about payroll information, and we did have some issues in terms of obtaining the information that we need to complete the audit. So we recognise the workload pressures on this small team, and there was a reliance on one officer to provide the information we were looking for, and we quite understand that there are other very important matters for payroll staff at points in the month to make sure that staff are getting paid. So we've made a recommendation in there, and I've been having discussions with finance team just in terms of how we can ensure that we don't come across similar issues moving forwards. The final point within the exhibit it was just a coding error in relation to short-term debtors, and it has resulted in the short-term debtors being overstated by £1 million with an equal understatement in short-term creditors. And again, that's been amended in the accounts that you're approving. So the cumulative total of the misstatements was above our materiality level, but we have considered each of the items that we've identified, and we are content that our audit approach was robust and that there is no risk of unidentified errors in the remaining population. We have a responsibility under the auditing standards to request that all misstatements are corrected. As I mentioned earlier, there is one unadjusted error that is just slightly above our reporting threshold. Management have not adjusted for this item. And although I have to request that they're all adjusted, I can understand why that hasn't been adjusted, and I am not concerned in any way with that remaining an unadjusted error for the accounts. The final thing I note on page 110 is just to note the progress that's been made on prior year recommendations, and I think it is important to note that given the significantly challenging year that has been faced across the public sector, and continuing to progress recommendations has been really good in that regard. Moving quickly into financial management on page 111, as you would expect, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the 2021 budget, and it has resulted in a number of revisions during the year. Paragraph 39, we just note that the council paid out 34 million of COVID-19 support grants on an agency basis. And we point back to our previous findings in relation to the governance and control framework for these COVID support grants, and our conclusion that they were appropriate and that they operated effectively during the year. Again, on page 113, budget processes were appropriate, and we note the planned efficiency savings were largely achieved. We point to the significant increase in the level of usable reserves, but note that the large majority of the increase has already been earmarked for future purposes. On page 114, we note the development of common good asset registers and how this has progressed. but that it is not yet complete, and there is further work that the council is doing to ensure that a complete record of the common good assets is held and maintained. We also note the financial systems of internal control operated effectively throughout the year, and that there is appropriate standards of conduct and arrangements for the prevention and detection of fraud and error. This year we did some specific work, and this is on page 115, in relation to the procurement arrangements that the council has in place. This was in accordance with the planning guidance that asked auditors to have a focus on this area during one of a 3-year period for each audit. Overall, we've concluded that there's sound procurement arrangements in place, and we have made one recommendation just in terms of the kind of detailed records of training within procurement to ensure that that is up to date and maintained. Within financial sustainability, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the short-term finances of the council. Medium-term financial plans have been updated to reflect the impact, but as yet the longer-term impact has not been fully assessed. And we just note that within this section. At page 19, we just make a recommendation in relation to that and the importance of the scenario planning that will take place to support the COVID-19 recovery. The change programme has continued to deliver savings, but again, the pandemic has increased the challenge of achieving the savings and what that will mean for the future. Moving into governance and transparency on page 120, the governance arrangements introduced in response to the pandemic were appropriate and operated effectively, and that the governance arrangements throughout the year have supported robust scrutiny, challenge and informed decision making. The final section is on best value. I will have seen many of you recently in roundtable discussions on the best value approach and the work that we are starting. So the best value assurance report for Angus Council is planned for publication in June 2022. As you're aware, planning is underway and we have been having some scoping discussions and we will formalising the scope in due course. Performance management developments were delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic, but they have now restarted. We do make a recommendation, and that is on page 123, in relation to the source of data used for performance indicators to ensure the timely production to support reliable and timely performance monitoring. We also note the Council's public performance reporting could be clearer about the outcomes of self-assessment, external scrutiny reviews and associated improvement actions. And just to note, at paragraph 88 within the report, which is on page 124, we are making a slight change in the final version in relation to this because we felt the narrative wasn't very clear. What we were really referring to in this paragraph was about the signposting. So while we recognise that performance reporting references partners and the role that they play, it's about how someone can understand the full suite of performance information and ensure it appropriately signposts to the different reports. We conclude that there are appropriate arrangements in place for following the public pound within the council. Just to say, Appendix 1, which is on page 126, includes the current year recommendations, but also, as I mentioned, the progress with prior year recommendations. And as I scroll down, thank you, Appendix 2, which is on page 133, pulls together the significant audit risks that we identified in our annual audit plan, details the results of our audit work in response to it and our conclusions from that work. Convener, that was all I was planning to say, but happy to have a discussion and answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Carol. That was a very comprehensive briefing on your report. Can I now open it up to members to bid for questions, please? No? Councillor Duff.
Thanks, Convener. I had I had a number of questions, either for, I think, Mr. Lorimer or for Ms. Grant, but I can give you the page numbers if you want.
Please.
82, 108, 109, 114 and 123.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, if there's no one else, Councillor Duff, let's go ahead on page 82.
Right, thanks. Yeah, I guess that my question has probably been answered by Carol Grant. This outstanding matter, I think, has now been resolved. That's correct. Okay, so that's that one dealt with.
108.
Just give us a second. Looking through. Yeah, just so I understand this one, item 4. This was a housing asset that was moved from the general fund to the housing revenue account. There was a loss, it was valued down, and it was essentially where that loss was sticking, and it was sticking in the general fund, which wasn't appropriate. That's essentially what we're saying there.
Yep, there's a nod of the head there.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and effectively what we should do is just write that loss off now.
Yeah, so it has been adjusted. I don't know if that's Chris someone's put their hand up.
Yes, it's Stephen Mill. Stephen?
Thanks there, Chair. Yeah, just to come in and answer that. Carol alluded to that this issue in our coverage, saying it was a complex matter, and yeah, it was. I'd underline that the 1.4 million appropriation value from the general fund to HRA didn't change, so that remained the same through this. What it really was about was the amounts as they stood on the general fund and HRA balance sheet. And when external audit raised that, it was obvious that there shouldn't be any remaining amount on the general fund balance sheet because there was no asset. But there was a question how to deal with it within the HRA. And even I think external audit went to their central technical team because they hadn't come across this matter before. So what happened was, yeah, we wrote down the value in the general fund before it was transferred down to the 1.4 million transfer value. It then transferred over to the HRA at that 1.4 with the general fund being recompensed. And then once it was on the HRA, we wrote it down from 1.4 to 0.8 million to recognise the social housing valuation. And that covered a number of park and cemetery lodges, but also Invertay House transferring to HRA in 2021.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to 109. This one's obviously embarrassing for those of us who are elected members, and also particularly at a time when the public and press are sort of focused on payments and expenses to politicians. For is an assurance that we've got a robust process in place now to pick up these sort of things, because we've already heard how hard stretched the payroll section are.
Sharon Faulkner?
Yes, thank you, Convener, and thanks, Councillor Duff, for the question. It's just to let you know that the payroll team leader has put in place a monthly review with committee services to ensure that we hold the correct councillors against the senior councillor positions, and that should highlight any discrepancies at the earliest opportunity.
That sounds good, thank you. Thanks for that.
Page 114.
Yeah, okay, you're ahead of me.
I've got them written down, that's why.
Yeah, well, so have I, but I'm also trying to look at them. Yeah, I guess, I mean, this is again an old chestnut, this 1114. It's the common good assets, and I know we've been working on this. I guess what I'm looking for is, it's complicated and quite extensive. It's just, have we got a timescale for when this will all be completed? I guess that's my question.
Who's taking that one? Councillor Lorimer?
Yeah, I might bring in Mrs. Buchanan on this one as well, if she's on the call. Convener, there was a report to, I think it was Policy and Resources a couple of months ago, looking to get some additional temporary resource to allow this work to be taken forward. I'm hoping Mrs Buchanan can give an update on whether that person is now in post and making progress with that work. As you can imagine, it is a very extensive exercise, but we do know, and Angus was recognised a number of years ago, long before the new Community Empowerment Act legislation, actually, as having quite robust asset registers. So this is more about making sure that there aren't any odd anomalies within our existing asset register. So we do have asset registers, and we use those to prepare the common good accounts. What we're really doing under the community empowerment legislation is double checking that and publicising what we have as a matter of record. But I'm hoping Mrs Buchanan can give an update on the work that was agreed from, I think it was a couple of months or so ago. So don't know if Jackie's on the call.
If you're with us, Jackie.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Lorimer. Happy to respond to this. Yes, the work is will be progressed. We've had a few challenges within both staff leaving. We've quite a few members of staff left over this year, and particularly within that team, which has made it a bit more difficult. And it's compounded by the fact that for some reason, conveyancing solicitors are a bit like hen's teeth just now. They're really hard to come across. And this, even within conveyancing, this is quite specific and complex work. We have found a resource that we think we could potentially use. And, it looks like that will work for us. And if so, that will be in place at the start of the year. And we'll be able to get moving on it and actually inform other members of staff a bit more about the know-how, because it is quite a complex and quite a technical area. So yes, fortunately, we do have a way forward with this one.
Thank you. All right. Anything else on the annual accounts?
Yeah, I just had one on 1, 2, 3, convener.
So I beg your pardon. Yes, I've got that note of it. I'm just.
Yeah, it was really just to sort of get some clarity here. I mean, what the point 84 is that the 26 indicators we didn't have data. Was this a one-off, or is that something we would normally expect to have?
Who's taking that one? No.
I think Vivian Smith.
Vivian Smith. Oh, sorry, it's just coming up. Vivian, please. Vivian, you're still on mute.
Apologies. That's why you didn't hear me saying I'd be happy to pick this one up, convener. Yeah, certainly this is one that's an ongoing issue for us, and one that we're always looking to improve on in terms of the data quality and timeliness of when we can bring things forward. And we are doing a fair bit of work looking now again at our new council plan in relation to the data that we'll be using and the targets that we'll be setting. And one of the things that we tried to do in the performance report this year was to set out more information that went back over a number of years, so that we could look at the trend information and build that rather than a one point in time period. It's certainly an issue in terms of data availability sometimes, that when you take it at a specific point in the year, which we do generally in September, and so having more of that trend information is really important and something we want to continue doing. But we are working with services as well to make sure that we've got the right measures in place, that we can bring timely data forward and improve our performance arrangements as from where they currently stand. So happy to accept the recommendation that's been made in the report, convener and Councillor Duff. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Yeah, thanks very much, Vivian. Probably I should have said at the beginning, I think it probably a general comment that it is a very good report. It's very satisfactory, and I guess also the fact that with the COVID situation, there was obviously very good cooperation between the auditors and the finance department of the council. So thanks to all staff involved in that.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Is there anything else on the annual accounts? If there isn't, let's look at the recommendations. First, to review the content and provide commentary. Second, to review the content of the report as Appendix B and to provide commentary. Scrutinise and approve for signature the annual audited accounts for Angus Council, the Robert and William Strang Mortification and the Angus Council Charitable Trust. Note the summary of the main movements, etc., and note the key messages. Do we agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. Let's move on now to internal audit at page 141. Kathy Wiley, please.
Thank you. I'm just checking that I'm not still on mute, but I'm not, so that's fine.
No, you're not. You're fine.
Good. So this is the progress report that you regularly get at each meeting, but there's also a couple of additional things. I'd like to start just with the fourth recommendation there, which is around...
Give us page numbers as you do that, please, Kathy.
I'm still on page 141 at the moment.
Okay.
The fourth recommendation there is around noting the arrangements for the committee's 2021-22 self-assessment session, which you should have had an invite for that on the 10th of March 2022. Yeah. And it's really just to confirm the format for that meeting. Further down, I think it's on page 143, at item 5, we're proposing that we'll run the meeting this year the same way as we did the last one that we had, and it was just to confirm that you're happy with that format.
Yes, I think that's the way to go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. If I move on now to the actual activity report and the update on what we've all been getting up to since the last time I was here speaking to you. I'm on page 146 now, and just under the heading of audit plan progress, just a few things there to draw to your attention. In terms of the plan itself, we've brought an audit of the leader programme from the pool into the main plan, and that's underway at the moment. We've also added an audit in regards to the Audit Scotland Fraud and Irregularity 2020-21 report that was issued in July. And what we'll do there is just have a look to see whether any of the things that have been going on elsewhere in Scotland have an impact for Angus Council. And I'll come to this one later on in terms of procurement and what we want to do with an audit that's been ongoing with that. Also, just to draw to your attention that although we've restarted the procurement audits, we're still they're progressing more slowly than we would normally progress an audit, just due to the workload within that team. But we are moving those on. And the last thing just to bring to your attention here was around one member of the audit team being temporarily seconded on a part-time basis to support the Council's Emergency Centre. At the end of September, since the 1st of April, there had been about 12 days of his time in there. And from the 18th of October until Christmas time, we've agreed about half a day will be spent in that support. Although that's obviously going to impact on the audit time that he has available, I'm not expecting that will make any difference in terms of preventing me from providing the assurances and opinions that I need to provide on this current year. If I move now on to actually the reporting that we're doing this time round, the things that have been completed since the last time, there's a summary on page 150 of all of the audits that we're reporting now. And I was reflecting when I was preparing for this on how good it is to see so many green and yellow conclusions in here. It's quite a nice page to look at from that perspective. But just moving on, the first project I'm talking about is the online recruitment new start process. And this was an audit just to review the new processes and controls that were in place for the recruitment of new employees. As part of this audit, we were also respective that there's more of this process to be digitalised, and it was about making sure that we had identified any areas that would help with that digitalisation process. We've got the results from this audit on page 153, where we've got a substantial assurance for this, and we were looking here around the training and guidance that had been put in place, the controls that were in place to ensure recruitment was working properly, authorisations and the preparations for new starts joining the council. And you'll see on the top of page 154 that we've got 11 recommendations in this report, 6 which are around design controls and 5 that are around the actual operation of these controls. Now, we did take a bit of time to finalise this report, so a number of these actions have already been completed. And so further down on page 154 and into 155, only the items that are in bold within that list are still outstanding. And in fact, I know that some of those are pretty far advanced because I've been asked myself from my own service perspective to update some of the items that we had recommended there. Just to go back up on page 154, I just felt it was important to recognise, as part of this audit, we spoke to quite a few people throughout services within the council, and we had an overwhelming number that praised the staff within the staffing team and other HR officers in the helpfulness and the patience that they had when they were asking them questions about the recruitment queries. So I think it's important to recognise that. We've got a bit more there about planned improvements that are coming within this system to make sure that things are more digital than they currently are in terms of being hopefully more efficient and effective. You'll see that the recommendations there on page 154 and 155 that are still outstanding are around about training, making sure things like the post-exemption request list is still valid and up to date, and getting performance indicators into place. There were also 2 recommendations here which we identified that were out with the scope of this audit but related, and these 2 recommendations are included in this report as a means of making sure that they are recorded and that an action plan is put in place and monitored. But they're not actually recommendations that are affecting the overall conclusion in terms of the assurance level here. And one of those is just making sure that IT have looked at their processes for fulfilling requests in advance of new starts coming and starting work with the council. And the other one is around reinstating the reporting on workforce data that comes to this committee. The next report is on page 100, starts on page 156, and this is around the protection of vulnerable groups. And we reviewed the control framework in place governing the operation of that protection of vulnerable groups PBG scheme within the council. And again, what we were looking here at was whether there were policies, procedures and guidance in place to make sure that these things were undertaken properly. You'll see on page 158 that we have again substantial assurance around this. There were 3 recommendations which are noted on page 159. Well, the table is on page 159 showing 3 control items there. We noted good practice here around how this is monitored and chased up if the monitoring shows that the certificates haven't been received, so that is in place if people are needing it to be in place before they start working. And again, as we spoke about in the previous report, there are planned changes to get this more digitalised so that it's impossible to move through the process if the PVG checks have not been signed off within the process. The 3 recommendations were around making sure that the guidance was up to date and included all the latest guidance from Disclosure Scotland. The other recommendation is around making sure that we review that on a regular basis to keep it up to date. And then also there was a recommendation around having another look at how this is recorded to see whether there is any opportunity to use ResourceLink to record the PVG membership number in order for all employee data to be recorded in one place. The next one was the housing improvements capital projects, where we were reviewing the processes and controls in place for the planning, monitoring and reporting of the projects in the council's approved housing capital plan. The objectives for this, which are on page 161, were around making sure that the programme of capital improvements were being developed in line with Scottish housing quality standards and energy efficiency requirements, and that there were appropriate arrangements in place for managing and reporting on the progress with the projects that had been approved and were being undertaken, and with specific look at the remedial action that was being taken to address the causes of any significant slippage or overspend on specific projects. Because if you look at the table, which is on page 161, around the reporting outturns for the last few years, there is quite significant underspend in the budget until we come to the current year. If we come down to page 162, you'll see that the overall level of assurance given for this report is comprehensive assurance, and we don't have any recommendations being made within this report. We did identify good practice around the way that the projects are being managed and action is being taken. And I think the testament to that shows in the fact that the table on page 161 shows that this year there'll be a small overspend in this, where previously there has been underspends in these areas. The next reporting that we've got is around the data analysis for the continuous auditing around payroll and accounts payable. Both of these have been brought up to the end of September processing, and we don't have anything in particular to draw attention to there. In terms of payroll, we're giving comprehensive assurance, and in terms of the accounts payable, we're giving substantial assurance, and that's been reduced from comprehensive assurance due to issues that were reported previously. And then we move on to the actions resulting from internal audit recommendations, and we've got the tables here on page 164 and 165 showing the position with these in terms of internal audit and counter fraud actions. I'd just like to say that there's been a big movement here from the last time when we reported 48 outstanding actions between all of those tables. We now only have 33, if my maths is correct, which is a significant amount of movement, which is really good to see, particularly because it means that we now only have one action from 2018-19, which is outstanding. The rest of them are all from audits in 1920 and 2021 or 21-22. And that, I think, is me finished with this report. I'll just take questions if anyone has them.
Okay, bids for questions. Nobody got questions? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, comprehensive report. You might not be able to answer this, so I apologise in advance, but on page 148, on the audits upcoming next year, has the scope been agreed for the fostering, adoption and kinship allowances audit? And can you, if possible, could you give me any more detail on that, please?
No, the scope for that has not been agreed. There'll be a very high level scope that would have been in the original plan, which right at the moment I can't remember exactly what it was, but we usually plan these just a month or so in advance of getting to them. So that's probably underway at the moment. But if you've got anything that you want to see in that, if you want to send me an email, we can try and cover that in the scope if that needs to be there.
Well, I might have a chat with you about it, because I think it came about on the back of one of my caseload issues, okay. So that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, go back to page 141 and we have the recommendations. To note the update and progress, to note the management's progress in implementing the etc. Agree to the procurement reform Scotland Act 2014 work being moved to 2022-23 and the addition of a review of the Audit Scotland's Fraud and Irregularity 2020-21 report to the 2022 plan, and note the arrangements for the committee's 21-22 self-assessment session on 10th March. Are these agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we move on to the corporate fraud review on page 167?
Okay, that's me again. Thank you.
Yes, that's you again, Kathy. I'm just getting there. That's it.
Okay, so I'm on page 167. This is the report just with an update on the work that the County Fraud team has been undertaking for the last 6 months up to the 30th of September. And I'm just pick out a couple of things within this to highlight to you. One of those is on page 167 at paragraph 4, just to confirm the team resource. The team still has the temporary additional counter fraud officer in post until May 2022, and that makes the capacity of the team 3.6 full-time equivalent people. The work that we're undertaking are the reactive corporate fraud investigations, and during the year we've signed off 5 of those, and there are currently 2 that are ongoing with within the team. The data matching work that we talk about at the top of page 168 is work that is proactive, and one of the things we've undertaken this year is a data match with information from a credit agency, and that has been quite useful in producing a new route for us to investigate, and we've seen some good results from that work. The team are undertaking fraud prevention work within the council and working with colleagues across services as and when required. And we also undertake housing tenancy fraud investigations with colleagues in housing, and during the 6-month period, successful recoveries of council properties as a result of that work. The whistleblowing policy has undertaken we've undertaken quite a significant review of that policy, partly to make sure that it's in line with what needs to be happening if the Health and Social Care Partnership or the IGB are involved in whistleblowing, and that is at a pretty advanced stage and will be coming to committee for approval quite soon, I hope. There's been work involved in terms of COVID-19, looking at some of the grants and working to investigate anything that looked suspicious there over the piece. And the National Fraud Initiative, as you know, is done every 2 years, and we're deep in the depths of that at the moment. The next report gives a little bit more information on that, but we are in the process of undertaking that work from the matches that have been given to us. In terms of going forward, on page 168, the forthcoming priorities will be to continue working with service colleagues on any referrals that we get in terms of investigations that need to be undertaken. We'll continue with proactive work, and we'll be also continuing with the NFI work. On page 169, there's a summary there that's saying that the work that we've done has identified losses in excess of £51,000, and that there is work ongoing at the moment to try and recover that money for the council. Ewan is with us today, so if there are any questions, he might be able to give a bit more detail than I will if there are specific areas that you would like more information on.
Okay, thank you, Cathy. Bids for questions? Julia, Councillor Bell?
Thank you. Page 168, please.
Anyone else? Councillor Devine?
169, please.
Anyone else? Councillor Bell, page 168.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on the housing tenancy fraud, and if there's any more detail on what actually happened there. Is that provision of false information perhaps to obtain a council allocation, and has that resulted in any criminal charges?
I think Ewan would probably be best placed to answer that one.
Okay, Ewan?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, these are 2 particular tenancies we've had in Arbroath, and the matter at hand for each of them was the failure to occupy the property by a tenant. So these properties are now being released for relet. They haven't brought about neither have brought about any criminal charges or referrals to the Procurator's Fiscal.
Is there any reasons why the properties were not occupied?
I specifically, I'm not sure, Convener. we find from time to time that persons vacate their properties and don't let us know, and to hold them open for whatever reasons they so choose.
That's quite all right. I'm familiar with that happening. Yeah, okay, that's fine. And Councillor Devine, page 169.
Yeah, it's just on 6.1. I was wondering how successful you're being in recovering that £51,000. Have you made any inroads into that?
We don't actually undertake that recovery within the counter fraud team. I don't know if there's anyone else within the council who'd be able, within the meeting, who could answer that. I see he's got his hand up.
Mr. Larimer?
Thanks, thanks, convener. Yeah, it will depend on the nature of what the issue is. A number of it might well be in relation to council tax and discounts that have been claimed to which people are not entitled, and we've flagged that up. In those circumstances, then people would be rebilled for council tax which they're due, and that would fall into our normal recovery processes to try and recover those sums. If it was something where there was an invoice needed to be raised, then again it would go through our normal process of recovery. I don't have figures to hand in terms of that 51,000 where we are in relation to that. We could certainly look at where that is in terms of the current position, but our debt recovery arrangements, whether it's for council tax or non-domestic rates or sales ledger invoices, are robust and pretty successful, as we've seen through our council tax collection rates as an example. So we would expect to collect that debt if we can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else on item 8? Okay, the recommendations, I think we've got to note, doesn't actually say it, it's just review and scrutinise. I think we should agree to note the report. Fine. Now, next one is the National Fraud Initiative, page 176. And I think that is Cathy Wiley again, please.
Yes, thank you. It's an update on where we are with the National Fraud Initiative work that we're undertaking. The work is not complete yet, and there will be further reporting to you around this when we finalise the work that we've done, and also at the point where the Audit Scotland will produce a national report, and that will be brought to the committee as well at some stage. So as you know, this is done every 2 years. We put in the data that was requested back at the end of 2019 and had a number of matches sent back to us in early 2020, although some of the information was done a bit later than that, just because it was new and different, and there's just been a little bit of delay in getting that organised. So at the bottom of page 176, you can see that we received 91 reports with a total of 3,419 individual matches. We obviously don't investigate all of these matches. The Director of Finance is involved with the counter fraud team in identifying on a risk basis which matches will be investigated and where that will take us to. At item 4.2, we've noted that the removal of private care home and personal budget data from the main 2021 exercise, and that's going to be collected in a different timetable and notified in due course, and that in this year there was the inclusion of matches relating to non-domestic rates and COVID support grants, which hadn't been looked at previously. Well, the non-domestic rates had been done as a pilot previously, but it hadn't been included in the main process. When we wrote this report, the overpayments that had been identified were £2,319 from housing benefit, council tax reduction and council tax discounts, and there had also been the cancellation of 318 blue badges. As of this morning, the amount of overpayments that have been identified for the same reasons, but also including non-domestic rates, is now sitting at just over £20,000. But obviously there's still a bit of investigation to go, so the final figure may be higher once we've completed all of the matches that we're investigating. And I think that's really all I need to say about this, and obviously Ewan is here again if there are any detailed questions about the work that's been undertaken.
Okay, bids for questions, Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, convener. I think Kathy's just probably answered my question. I was going to comment on the quite low figure of £2,319 from housing benefit overpayments, and I was just going to ask if the systems were really robust, or whether perhaps the amount of resource put into investigating this was out of proportion. But you've updated the figure, and it's quite a significant figure now. So I don't know if you've got any more comment on the amount of resource that's put into that aspect.
I think in terms of the amount of resource, it is a significant amount of resource, but until you've done it, you don't really know what the outcome is going to be, and it's very difficult. And I think that the reassurance that the National Fraud Initiative would tell us, we get, and I think we do get this, is that if you get low returns from this, it's assurance or reassurance that your systems are operating reasonably well and that you don't have high levels of fraud in there. It is always a bit of a dilemma when we come to look at this, because it is so resource intensive. I've just, as I said, we had 90 something reports and thousands of matches, and it's just how far down the matches do you go before it is actually just a time exercise that isn't producing anything else, and it is a judgment call each year.
Okay, anything else? Okay, we're asked to note the progress in investigating the matches from the NFI. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Item 10 is detailed risk reporting, and this was going to be Margot Williamson, but unfortunately Margot is ill, so therefore it's Mark Armstrong. Mark?
Thank you very much, convener. And yes, I know she was particularly keen to present this report to committee and to talk through the exception that's been done across all services and work with our partners for what is now getting close to 2 years. I would start by drawing committee's attention to the description that's in the papers that you've got, where when we were identifying this as a risk, way back at the start of 2020, it was really to ensure that the council and our partners had the ability to continue to provide essential services, and particularly to protect the most vulnerable citizens in Angus, our wider community and our local economy. And I think it's fair to say, and I think evidence would support this, that we've done an exceptional job in terms of being on top of that risk and making sure that we're continually monitoring the changing impacts that the pandemic is having, and then flexing and responding both our workforce and our work with partners to deal with those things as they've materialized. I would particularly highlight that I would think that anybody that's watching the media would be aware of this, that we are far from out of this pandemic. As we go further into winter, the demands that responding to the pandemic, as well as recovering from the impacts of the pandemic, that combined with issues such as normal kind of winter ailments and kind of flus, as well as the kind of extreme weather that we tend to get in the winter, and clearly we're just coming out the back of Storm Arwen, is placing considerable pressures on the councils and our partner systems. And I would seek kind of the committees and elected members recognition of that in terms of the capacity that all services have to continue to operate as usual, taking account of all the kind of different demands that the pandemic has placed on us. But I would highlight that our engagement with the Local Resilience Partnership has been very well received and has been highlighted nationally as very good work. Our support for our colleagues in NHS Tayside, both in terms of coordinating and delivering the test and protect system and the vaccination programs, again, has been extremely effective and has drawn in resources from a number of partners, and we really have collaborated and worked well on that, and that continues to make demands on both our services and our partner services, as well as engagement with our local communities and residents. We continue to have dedicated support going out through the access line for those that are shielding and providing assistance to individuals in need. And we have also been consistently, really, for more than a year, working on aspects of recovery as well as changing our practices in terms of operations. And Jackie Buchanan's on the call, may wish to come in and say a bit more about that work. But what we're finding is we're having to balance that agenda around recovering from the pandemic or learning to live with the pandemic with fluctuations in terms of infection rates and the impact that that's having. In the recent past, we've seen increases again in terms of members of our staff having to staff isolate, large volumes of children and young people within our school population not being able to access school for periods because they've been having to self-isolate or have been identified as COVID positive. So clearly a lot of kind of pressures within the wide system continuing. But I would advise just how kind of productive and impactful I think the council's work has been. We have managed to retain and sustain all of our frontline services over the period and have been redeploying resources to enable that to happen where that's been required. We have been catching up on areas of work that have been affected by things that we had to suspend doing in the early days of the pandemic, and particularly during the lockdown processes. And again, I've advised of those previously. And we continue to flex our workforce to the changing demands. So in terms of our corporate response to the risk, I think we continue to do a very good job to keep on top of that and to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our vulnerable communities and that we are supporting our business and other communities. And sorry, I should have highlighted the work that has continued in relation to the administration and distribution of our specific grant funding and support to key sectors, whether it's in local communities or within key sectors of the local economy. So whilst it's been an extremely challenging and continues to be a challenging period, I think it's been an incredibly proud period for the council in terms of the role that it's played with our partners to keep our communities safe and to enable the kind of the impacts of the pandemic to be minimised. But now actually, the work is to move out of that and to work to kind of get our own services and our communities back to a point where we feel that we're a bit closer to what would have been regarded as a normal life. But I'm happy to take any questions from the committee, and like I say, there are other colleagues on the call that are working on specific areas that may want to come in as well.
Okay, bids for questions. Councillor Bell.
Thanks. Page 180.
180. Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Please.
Okay,
yeah.
And thank you, Mark. I would absolutely commend our council for all the work that they've done in partnership to respond to COVID, and particularly in relation to the Storm Arwen, which has placed additional pressure on. And I note from the papers that the additional risk of concurrent events have been very likely, and I think these things are going to be our business as usual. I don't think the pandemic is going away anytime soon, but that gives me concern around the council's ability and our services within the council to continue to flex and to respond to the situation. I think there comes a time when people are really stretched a bit too thinly, and I just wondered what plans there are to look at a long-term provision in terms of resilience and emergency management. I think we're going to get more extreme weather conditions unless we really properly tackle the climate emergency issue, and this is going to be very much our business as usual, and I think I would take some comfort on behalf of our communities to know that there is going to be a permanent, consistent additional resource that can help us to deliver on all of this emergency planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Through you, convener. I think it's a fair point. One thing I would highlight is, and because the pandemic has been running for so long, and both through our gold meetings, our silver IMT meetings, and our individual service bronze meetings, I think the council has built exceptional cross-organisational capacity and capability, really, to manage extreme events. And I would say organisationally, we're in a much stronger position than we were in 2019 in terms of the expertise and competence that we've built across our workforce. But I think it's also recognised that we do need subject experts in this area, and the role we've played in the local result. Myself and colleagues have played in national groups in relation to not just the pandemic, but extreme weather events as well, has again built our expertise, but also a recognition that there is a potential risk that this is going to become more business as usual, and that these particularly severe weather events combined with winter flus and bugs are going to potentially be the kind of areas that we just have to cope with more and more. So it's certainly something that the corporate leadership team are mindful of. We're continually reviewing whether or not we have the capabilities in the right place, and where do we need to build particular skills. So it's a question that's on our minds. But I would say that I wouldn't want to rush into saying, so we need to build this team. I think what I think is the right approach for us to be taking is, how do we scale up the capabilities of our workforce so that we have a kind of wider body of people that can shoulder the burden when it's required. As we've seen over the last week, really, a mixture of staff coming in and out of meetings, similarly with agencies like Police Scotland, and we have good handover arrangements, and we have a range of different people who are carrying the load over many days and over many hours.
Thank you. Councillor Fotheringham?
Mine, convener, if there's no more questions, is a comment, if I may.
Yes, carry on.
Thank you, convener. It was just to support and back up and commend what Mr. Armstrong has said there about over the last 21 months, and particularly in the last week as well, the dedication that the staff, they've worked absolutely flat out. I mean, I have had not one complaint from constituents, absolutely the opposite, the support they've given. I mean, it's, as Mark said, it's been a challenging period, but the partnership working with community volunteers, the support to vulnerable citizens, the speed that the business grants have been put out, and I know in my ward today and probably other wards, Councillor Whiteside and I heard this morning that there's food vans going out. So Mark, certainly on my behalf, but I think I speak for everyone in this virtual chamber, please commend your staff and yourself. I know you've been flat out all weekend because you mentioned that yesterday. You're doing a fantastic job and we're proud of you all.
Councillor Salmond?
Yes, I'd like to just follow up on Councillor Fotheringham and actually thank, obviously the Chief Executive's not with us today, but specifically thank the Chief Executive and Deputy Chief Executive for their exemplary leadership through the COVID period. I mean, as a cabinet, the administration were actually meeting daily during the peak of the COVID-19. We were meeting regularly with officers, so we saw for ourselves the excellent work that our officers were doing. So I'd really just like to thank them again. They know who they are for all the hard work that they've done over this last sort of 20 months, and I'm sure there's a lot more hard work for us all to do, unfortunately, as we see the COVID-19 rising its head again. So thank you, convener.
Thank you. Okay, if that's everything, we're asked to scrutinise the report and note the information presented. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 11 on page 183. Is that you, Vivian, or is it Gordon Cargill?
Happy to pick that up, convener, if you're okay with that.
Carry on.
So this report really is a report that's already been to our council meeting. but it comes here for any further scrutiny that you would like to have of the detail. Clearly what it's doing is showing that there are a number of things that we've been able to kind of lock down, if you like. I think that's the terminology for the current financial year from our change programme. But there are three quite big outstanding savings that we haven't been targets that we haven't been able to lock down. One is around procurement and commissioning, and that was a project that we were engaging with other local authorities on. However, that hasn't gone away altogether. It's just been refocused into kind of three areas that we want to look at in a bit more detail around road maintenance, hard management and the fleet review across the council areas of Angus, Dundee and Perth and Kinross. So we'll look a bit more detail at that in a bit more detail, and we're also looking at what we can do ourselves in relation to procurement and commissioning more generally. So more to follow on that in due course, I think. But essentially the target that was in for 21-22 of 150,000 won't be met. And similarly, there was a target in for service reviews in 21-22 of 226,000. A lot of these will be informed by business insights work. You won't be surprised to know that a lot of that work was postponed due to officers being redirected towards other work over the last year or so. And so we're at the process now where we want to get underneath the skin of what the data tells us in relation to our business insights, and we think that we'll be able to start picking some of that up into future years, but not necessarily under the banner of service reviews. And the third area is around Tayside contracts, where we have a challenge of meeting the £350,000 that was targeted for the 21-22 period as well. Clearly, there are a number of outstanding issues there in relation to how we're working across that whole Tayside area, and how we're working with Tayside contracts across that area as well. And I think some of the inflationary pressures that Tayside contracts are facing at the moment are quite significant. So that's something that we'll take a look at, and clearly these areas will be picked up as part of the budget process. We've already flagged those through a range of council papers, financial papers, and we will be looking at transitioning our change programme so that we can bring it forward as part of the budget setting process in February, with a robust kind of refocus of where we're going next. Happy to take any questions, convener.
Any questions? No question? In that case, the recommendation is to scrutinise this. I think we should note it. Thank you. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, Treasury Management. Mr. Lorimer.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, this is the 2021 Treasury Management annual report. It's the standard annual report that we bring around this time, really to report to the committee on the extent to which our actual Treasury Management activity matched the strategy, which in this case was set back in March of 2020. I think it's fair to say that 2021 year saw COVID-19 impact on our Treasury Management activity to a significant extent. That manifested itself in a number of ways. It delayed our capital programmes. That in turn delayed our need to borrow to fund some of those capital programmes. We saw a large increase in our temporary balances. And then we also saw a reduction in the investment returns that we could make on that temporary cash. It was a very unusual year in the sense of, additional grants, business support grants, a lot of money coming in and out of the council's bank account over that. Just in terms of headlines, our overall debt reduced, as you'll see from the report. Although I do need to point out that's solely due to the fact we didn't undertake any new borrowing, and we had some debt maturing during the year, and so we still have an underlying need to borrow. We didn't borrow at all during 2021. Effectively postponed new borrowing. Slippage on our capital programme and the position on our temporary cash balances meant it really couldn't justify undertaking any of that borrowing. We will still need to borrow at some point, and continuing at this point to defer when that new borrowing is taken, trying to time that for when it's absolutely required, but we have to keep an eye on interest rates. That is a delicate balancing act, especially just now, because inflation is more of a concern in the wider economy. So that's just something that we're dealing with in the current year. Our loans pool rate, I'm on table 2 on page 193. Our loans pool rate, our interest rate, was above the budget. That's pretty unusual. That's not where it tends to end up, but it was a little bit above the budgeted level, and that resulted in a bit of an overspend on our loan charges budget last year, and that's been reported through our annual accounts. That was mainly because our interest costs were affected by lower investment returns, and we also had a lower overall debt level against which to charge interest costs because we'd postponed new borrowing. Our investment return, this is table 3 on page 194, shows that we didn't achieve our internal goal of return, primarily due to a reduction in investment rates we could achieve on our temporary cash. Really, the reasons for that, as explained in the report, is that the unprecedented measures by government and the Bank of England in response to COVID meant there was very high levels of the supply of money and less demand in the economy for borrowing during that period. So that impacted on the investment rates we were able to achieve. Page 195 and table 5 shows the loans that matured during. Most of those were taken by our predecessor authorities, and you see from that table how long-term some of the Treasury management decisions are. So some very old loans have matured during 2021. Glad to have those off the books now. And there were two breaches of counterparty limits during the year, which I've flagged up in the report and I mentioned to the committee. They're in paragraph 4.11 on page 197 of the report. One was caused by really the very unpredictable cash flow we had during the early period of the pandemic. As I mentioned, there was very large sums coming in and out, associated business grants and acceleration of etc. So that was really the cause of that one. The other one was really an administrative error on an investment which was rolled forward with the same counterparty. Neither of those breaches, I think, put the council's cash at risk, but we have made some changes to processes to try and avoid a repeat of those issues. So overall, a very different, challenging year in Treasury management. But despite all of those challenges, I think we've kind of managed that pretty well. But it has been a busy and challenging year. Happy to answer any questions that members have, Convener. Thank you.
Bids for questions on Treasury management? Councillor Duff, that you waving your pencil at me? No?
No, I'm not asking a question.
That's quite all right. No, I just saw you waving and I just thought for a minute. Councillor Devine. Yeah, this may be a bit of a silly question, but just picking up on your last point there, Mr. Lorimer, I can't imagine how you can have the crystal ball to know that a company that is A-rated or a counterparty that's A-rated is at some point going to be A- rated. So I'm not sure how to respect, because it wasn't your fault.
Thanks, Councillor Devine. Through you, Convener. Yeah, in this case, we should have double checked that the credit rating of the counterparty hadn't changed. changed. So it changed from, because it was an investment that was rolled over, and it wasn't rechecked that the counterparty's credit rating had changed in between times. So that's why I'm saying we've tightened up the process to try and avoid that. A lot of those they can fluctuate from time to time. We have different limits as to what we can invest with different counterparties at different ratings to try and manage the risk. So that's something that's popped up this year that we're trying to make sure doesn't arise again. But it was as tends to be the case with these things, the circumstances are a little bit unusual, and that's why when those unusual circumstances arise, it tends to flag up a need for improvement. Treasury is a very difficult area to try and predict what will happen around, inflation, the economy, interest rates, etc. A lot of guesswork.
Well, all I'm doing at the end of this is looking very much at table 3.6, table 5, and seeing some of the interest rates we had in the 1980s compared to what we're getting now. I think some people can't were at that particular time. I think unless you had a mortgage at that time, it wouldn't be in your memory, but I certainly did, and it hurt like terrible. So we're asked to lost the
sorry to interrupt. Councillor Salmon's got his hand up, convener.
Sorry, I didn't see that. Who's got? Oh, Councillor Fotheringham.
Sorry, Councillor Salmon was first.
Oh, Councillor Salmon was first, was he?
Yep.
I was busy looking for the recommendations.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, convener. Appreciate the challenging times that we've had, but I really just wanted to thank Mr. Lorimer and his team for the excellent job that they do in finance. You're a previous finance convener and I'm the current finance convener, so I think we're both aware of the excellent job that Angus Council's finance team have done over many years. So again, thank you, Mr. Lorimer.
And Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you, convener. Mine is just on the back of what Councillor Salmon said. Just to thank Mr. Lorimer and his team. He does an excellent job, and he's always so cool answering a question. He never gets flustered. He never gets frustrated, and neither does any of his team. I've never seen them actually raising their voices or getting flustered. So, Ian, on my behalf again, and I'm sure everybody, as Lynn said, Councillor Devine, said that you don't have a crystal ball, but it's an exemplary report. You've through challenging times, and your team has done a fantastic job. So, thank you very much.
Okay, the recommendations are to review and scrutinise. I suppose we better note this report. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, on to the digital maturity assessment, which is Mark Armstrong, and that starts on page 201.
It's myself, Councillor King, Sharon Faulkner.
Okay, Sharon, carry on.
Okay, thank you very much, convener. This is a very positive report regarding Angus Council's digital maturity. The Local Government Digital Office captured the views of our whole leadership team when they were undertaking this assessment, and you'll see that all councils across Scotland have been undertaking this assessment too. So Angus Council has been rated at 3 on a 1 to 5 scale of digital maturity, which might sound about average. However, we have been told that no other council has as yet been rated above a 3, and Angus Council is in fact in the top 10% in terms of its digital maturity in councils across Scotland. You'll see that a 3 means that we're rated as data-centric, so we've been assessed as having a corporate-wide systematic approach to our digital service design, and we started to use data analytics to enable targeted and preventative services. I think the work that we'd already done on our digital journey pre the pandemic stood us in good stead, particularly in moving quickly to home and agile working. And in fact, our rollout of Office 365 was recognised as being very well established, as well as the delivery of many of our online services. Some challenges, of course, have been highlighted in terms of our resources, connectivity and infrastructure. However, it was also recognised that work was already progressing in relation to these areas. Our corporate leadership team met to discuss the report, and we had a creative conversation, and we identified the key themes that we wanted to focus on. And I've got Caroline Cooper along here today, and she's just going to say a little bit more about these for us. Just hand over to Caroline.
Caroline, are you there?
Thank you. You'll have read in the appendix that digital transformation is 80% about the people and ways of working and 20% about the technology. And so that's what we have reflected in the themes for the future. But one very key element in the themes for the future of technology is the broadband connectivity. We in Angus have made huge strides, particularly around schools connectivity. We've got good connectivity for all schools now, but obviously there's ongoing work still to do, so that's reflected in the future themes. But that 80% focus on people and ways of working is why we're talking about skills, digital champions, and service redesign. So talking about the skills of the workforce, if we take, for example, we, like every other organisation, have made a big investment in tools like Microsoft 365. There are so many productivity and collaboration features being released all the time, and we need to continue to equip our staff, our people, with the skills to get the most from those so that day-to-day working is easier and more efficient. And the skills of the workforce is closely linked to digital champions, as we see that as a way to enhance knowledge in combination with awareness sessions and training guides and so on. And the Digital Champions programme is very much about encouraging those who have the confidence in their own skills to support others who don't. Another part of that 80% covering people and ways of working is service redesign. We've been doing a lot on process redesign and on digitisation, and that definitely put us in a good position, for example, to support all the new COVID processes digitally. But upping a gear, if you like, we've got to start looking at end-to-end service redesign. Quite often, end-to-end service redesign has been determined by historic or internal factors. So, for example, the applications that we're currently using are old, they haven't been changed for a while. Perhaps the perceived best way of doing things may have considered without having the data to back up those applications, rather than being designed around the service user. So to improve our service offering and to improve our digital maturity, our services need to be designed more around the customer, where possible, with more use of real-time data rather than historic. So that's very much what we're talking about in terms of the. So in summary, all of the themes we've talked about need to be incorporated into the new digital vision. There'll always be more to do on the technology. Talk a lot about big user expectations about reliability and availability and the totally change of cybersecurity threats. So all of that means significant technology changes. So that has to be a big theme of the digital. But our digital vision for the future must very much focus on much more about needs of people, much more about skills, and be much more customer focused around the service redesign. That's very much around the new themes for our digital way forward.
Okay. It's for questions. Councillor MacDonald.
It's basically the entire thing.
Basically the entire thing. Councillor Whiteside.
Yeah, same. It's just a general comment, really. A general question and comment.
Councillor Devine.
Question on 219.
219. Anyone else? No. Right, let's go to 219 and Councillor Devine.
Yeah, Caroline, you were saying that about the digital champions being very important. Do we actually have digital champions? Because it seemed from the report that they were looking at other councils that did have them.
And at the moment, so
Councillor Brown, would you like to mute?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Do we have digital champions? And are you envisaging this just within the council? I mean, I know that's huge enough, but we have a lot of people outside there. So many people who are being excluded from digital. We need to upskill people in the general public. Obviously, over the recent past, lots of things like the libraries, which used to help people, have been closed. Other things like Silver Surfers haven't been happening either. So there is a real need now for people to be upskilled so that they can be included in digital work.
Okay, which one of you wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yes, we do have digital champions, but we are in the process of refreshing that program because during COVID it kind of, I wouldn't say fell by the wayside, but it had less focus. And yes, it also, in answer to your question, what I was talking about in particular here is about internal and about internal skilling. However, I understand that there are a number of programs setting off again around the kind of digital champions and around support across the community, so that people are not excluded from what has become almost a de facto method of communication and getting services.
Okay.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, convener. This is probably one of the most difficult to read reports I've ever sort of gone through to get your head around. And I've kind of gone over whether or not it is a positive report or a negative report in a way. And looking at it, it's absolutely positive, with a huge dollop of negativity. And if we're in the top 10%, where does that fit? And I think the conflict is sort of surmised for me in 213 with the confidence levels in that sort of graphic, because it kind of is so, how do you word it? People are confident, but they're not confident, but the other side of the operation is confident, but we're not sure what anybody else is doing, so we're all over the place. It's kind of how I sort of surmise that sort of reading of it. And that's kind of, for me, is what this report, the main appendix of the report, is all about. I think that you as a team obviously know, following this, what the priorities are, and you know what to do to fix it. It's really weird that you get reports in and you read them, and like the recent Harbour one that was dynamite, absolutely perfectly laid out, things I don't understand, boom, 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 got it. It was like, whoa, what's going on, and where is it, and why is that there, and why is the quote got a rocket ship on it, and why is this got that? It's so weird. So on it seems like that we do have a good staff knowledge, we've got a good leadership team. That's obviously reflected in the themes that you guys are going for, and I think that's great. The one question I would come out at the end of this big waffle is, where do we fit in as elected members? Because there isn't really any, there's one reference, I think, in the main report of elected members in this. And I look at the Office 365 rollout, and I would wager 90% of the call don't know what Office 365 is from the councillor side of the fence. And where do we fit in this? Because as elected members, you're going to need buy-in for the transformational change potentially, or is this purely operational? This is the digital thing, but then if it's 80%, if we're looking at making sure the public engagement's all about. So it's that kind of thing that it's, the whole report for me has been that push and pull thing. It's brilliant, but it's not great. It's difficult, but where do we fit in? Where's the buy-in from councillors if this is our approach? So yeah, there's something in there that you can probably come back to me with.
I'm happy to cover some of that. Absolutely, we need your buy-in, Councillor MacDonald, around our strategic approach. And Caroline and I were actually discussing this in terms of induction for new councillors and how important it will be to get their buy-in, and also to raise the knowledge and skills of councillors in this area. So we've had a lot of thoughts around that and how we will be taking that forward during the induction process, because we probably do need to do more around skills and knowledge of our elected members. So it's a really good question. In terms of the report itself, yeah, I can see what you mean about that dubiety with it. But when we met with the senior digital officer from the digital office, she was able to explain it obviously to us, and she assured us that she felt that we were doing really well, and it was very positive in terms of where we are, in line with our other councils across Scotland. So yeah, it isn't an easy report to read though. So I think Caroline, did well picking the themes out of it, and we've highlighted those that we want to pursue. And obviously, you feel that those are the right ones as well. So
I think a lot of credit has to be given to the officers that managed to disseminate that report and get stuff. That's what I was.
That's all right, Sam.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I mean, it was quite a positive report in many ways, and it was good to hear Caroline on the customer focusing on the person. But are we really taking a people-centred approach? There's some problems in focusing on digital when we've seen, like, the events of the last weekend, when power cuts caused devastation to people. We end up relying on things like the access line, which is not resourced enough to cope with such events. There's people in the rural areas who have moved from analogue to digital, who have no way of contacting help or finding out what's going on. And I think we need to be very careful about building in resilience, particularly in our rural communities, as we move forward with the digitalisation of our services. So that's just worth, we can't forget that aspect of it. It's good to see progress, but we have to take everybody along with us.
Okay. I don't think anyone needs to come back on that one. Councillor Salmond?
Yes, thanks again, convener. I think this is a really positive report for Angus Council. I mean, as you see in 3.2, the report summary explains Angus Council's in the top 10 over Scotland, and I'm sure many of our other councils in Scotland would love to be in the top 10%. So again, a lot of credit goes to our officers for all the hard work we do, and I'd like to thank them all again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, we're asked to note the contents. Do we agree to note? Thank you.
Agreed.
Right, let's move on to item 14, page 226, okay, complaints report.
That's myself, convener. I'll just give you a brief outline of the report itself. It highlights the complaints received in Q2 of 2020-21 and provides details of how the council is learning from complaints, as well as details in paragraph 4 of the numbers of complaints. Paragraph 5 has various performance indicators, and these were based on those initially set by the SPSO. The latest position on them, in fact, is that they're receiving feedback from quite a long-standing consultation they put out. I think, to be honest, it's been held up in terms of COVID, and a lot of the councils have struggled in terms of being able to provide the performance indicators requested. So we asked for an update recently from them, and they said that they're working on the analysis of the feedback received about these draft KPIs and will be in touch as soon as possible with the next steps. You'll see that we have various PIs, as I mentioned, in terms of paragraph 5. And at 5.8, we detail the governance arrangements. To date, what we've done is we've brought the quarterly figures to Scrutiny Audit Committee. There's actually no requirement for us to do this. The requirement is, in fact, to publish quarterly the information on complaint outcomes and actions taken to improve the service, and that will be on our website. I was proposing, in terms of the recommendations, that a further report on complaints will be brought to the Scrutiny Audit Committee in March next year, outlining proposals and a framework for future reporting to committee. At paragraph 5.9, there's reference to staff training. We engaged SBSO to provide quite comprehensive training on stage 2 complaints, which can be quite complex. That was run over a 3-day period, full mornings, so it was 1.5 full days. And I think the officers found it very helpful that were involved. Work's also been developed to produce e-learning for all staff. The model for the e-learning is in 2 parts, dealing with both stage 1 and stage 2 complaints. And it was expected to launch early September. Work's still ongoing with completion, and that's expected very shortly. 5.10 of the report details complaint actions and outcomes and details learnings from those complaints. Happy to take any questions from members.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bids for questions, please. Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Page 227, please.
Anyone else? Okay, Councillor Bell, 227.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jackie. I wanted to pick up on the line in the table that says other across the 2 quarters. That's 51 different complaints. And I wondered if there was a theme emerging from those other complaints that didn't fit into the other categories, or if that's worthy of further interrogation, because it seemed quite a high number. That's about 1/3 of the complaints. I think it'd just be helpful if you were able to tease anything out on that.
I could certainly find that out, Councillor Bell, and confirm. I'm not sure, Elaine Whitted deals with the detail of these. I'm not quite sure if Elaine's managed to get back to the meeting, because I know she had another engagement this afternoon that she couldn't avoid. But I'll get back to it.
Okay, thank you. It's just sometimes, you know, from my Public Health Scotland experience, quite often things come into an organisation because people don't know where to properly direct them, and then they can be signposted off. So I just would be interested to know a bit more about that. Thank you.
That's the problem. Sorry, can I just clarify with you, Councillor Bell? Was that on page 227 you said?
Yeah.
Could you tell me which table it is? I may be just missing it.
It's just at the top.
At the top.
Yeah, it's the third row down. Yeah.
18 and 33. Yes, I've got it. Thank you. I'll certainly look it for you.
Right, is there anyone else? With regards to note the information in this report, is that agreed? Agreed, thank you. Item 15, and this will be you as well, Jackie.
Yes, convener. This is an update that we agreed to bring in terms of best practice. It's in terms of any RIPSA work that's required. You'll see from the report that there was no authorisations granted for surveillance and other investigatory activities during the relevant period. And other than that, it just provides a background.
And as there was no actions, I presume that nobody's got any questions. Am I right? In that case, can we ask to actually take the recommendations and note that no authorisations were granted? Is that agreed? Thank you. And finally, we come on to the council plan, which I believe was somewhere else. Yes, it was 4th of November. It was at Angus Council. Anyone wish to take this one? So I had it down for Margot. I don't know whether. Sorry?
Convener, I would be happy to pick this if that's okay. Thank you. So, as you note, it was considered by Angus Council in terms of the performance information there more generally, but certainly it's here today for any scrutiny that you would like to undertake in relation to the community plan annual report. Certainly see it as being a really good reflection of the partnership work that we do in Angus and the collaboration that we have across a whole range of different partner organisations, whether that be police, fire, health, the third sector, the college, you know, all of us working together, I guess, make greater the sum that is greater than the sum of the parts. And so we see that coming through in a number of key strategic policies that are coming through, whether those are in relation to sport or culture or food growing or whatever. There's been a lot of work happening and is detailed in the performance report over the year with some case studies there. Try to detail the performance information in that trend way that hopefully we can build on over the coming years. But convener, I don't want to go into any more detail of the report, but happy absolutely to take any questions.
I think it was well dealt with at council on the 4th of November. So if anyone has any questions, please. Nobody has any questions? We're asked to scrutinise and note the report and note that the community plan will be reviewed in 2022. Is that agreed? Oh, sorry, before we go there, Councillor Braze, your hand popped up while I was reading the recommendations. Councillor Braze.
Sorry, convener, I don't need to ask any more questions on
Right,
this.
thank you. In that case, do we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Fine, thank you. In that case, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your forbearance. I was looking very carefully to see we didn't go over the 3 hours, but we're well within the time. So goodbye, everybody. We will see you again sometime.